Hello. Sorry it's been a while. I haven't had much time to play Lorcana recently because I just started a new job, still getting my bearings onto that. So here's a fun one for you today. Now that set championship season is basically almost over and Wilds Unknown is almost entirely spoiled at this point, I think it's a good time to take stock of where we are at the end of Winterspell Core Constructed, so set 11, not yet set 12, and identify exactly what's critical in this format. I think it's a useful exercise to do before a new set comes into the picture, so that will be Wilds Unknown, because we need to fully understand where we are at set 11 before we will be in a position to evaluate and predict what set 12 would bring to change or add to the existing format, especially since at this point Core Constructed is fairly large, set 5 all the way to set 11, now we're adding set 12, the impact might be fairly minimal, so good time to take stock, I think. And of course, since Infinity is coming up with the Infinity season, Infinity DLCs, it would be useful to look at set 5 to set 11 constructed, where there has been a lot of tournaments, a lot of play, and see based on the results and what we know of the format, whether any of these cards would be able to translate to impact the pillars of the format in Infinity. But first, what is a pillar of the format? It's a term that's bandied around a lot, in card game commentary videos like this one, but generally everybody means a set of cards that is core to a format's identity because these cards are important to the strategy of a format. Of course, this list, if I were to form a list of the pillars of Core Constructed, it would be endlessly just going through the best cards in the best decks in Core Constructed, which is kind of a boring and slightly pedantic exercise. So for my list that I'm going to form for the purposes of evaluating in this video, I'm going to set a few extra guiding criterion to operationalize what we mean by pillars of the format, the general definition that I used earlier. First extra criterion, it must be played in more than one competitive deck, because if it is truly a pillar of the format, it's a card that multiple decks would want to use to benefit from. Secondly, the card in question would have to be a key reason why strategically you want to be in a certain ink color. Again, if the card is so good, you would bend over backwards to want to play that card, which includes being in that ink color. Fair enough. Third guiding criterion, the card is a key reason for the success of the decks that it is played in from a game in hand win rate or games played percentage. Basically, the games where you draw the card or the games that you play the card, it leads to winning more games, or it leads to a big delta in your win rate versus if you don't draw the card or if you don't see the card. Obviously, we don't have this type of data in Lorcana currently, but just from general vibes of playing, we just use this as a definition to draw some conclusions. Last guiding criterion, and this is fully a personal preference, when we're talking about pillars of the format, I prefer to talk more about engine cards that are the thing that set up how you end up winning the game, rather than the payoff cards, which are the cards that actually lead to you actually winning the game. So an example would be in Infinity, Lucky Dime is kind of the payoff, but the setup that allows you to get to the point where you can play Lucky Dime are your Fortispheres and your Popsicles and whatnot. Alright, so with definitions of pillar of the format out of the way, let's now look through what I think are the pillars of Core Constructed. Firstly, we have Demona and Elsa. Need I really say more? These two Amethyst cards, along of course with Cheshire Cat, form the core of any mid-range deck that wants to play Amethyst, and is basically the reason for Purple Steel and Blood Pool's success all the way since set 10. I didn't include Cheshire Cat, and I'm only focusing on Demona and Elsa because in my opinion, I think Cat is the most replaceable of these three, the lowest power level of the cards. You could, for example, put in like a 3-cost 4/4 for example, and while the deck would suffer in playing that over playing Cheshire Cat, it wouldn't suffer that much compared to Demona. Because Demona, nothing replaces Demona. She truly does it all. She refills your hand right when it's just about to be empty, when you're at your 6 ink spot. It exerts your opponent's stuff so that you can use your larger characters to challenge in and get good trades, especially on key targets like Prince Philip III, who has ward, so you can't hit it normally, you have to use Demona to get there. Of course, Demona is huge, she quests for 2, she basically does everything. Elsa does as well to a lesser extent because it's an evasive body, so it gets to quest in the later stages of the game, gets to use Dumbo's ability in the later stages of the game, but on turn 5, or rather when you just hit 5 ink, you use it to exert something and get a value trade. Works well on both sides of the coin, similar to Demona. but emphasis on Demona over these two because I think Demona is extremely busted. And the reason why Amethyst has been so good in Core Constructed, and she's not going away from rotation because she's in set 10. Jeez. Alright, second pillar of Core Constructed in my opinion, Sail the Azurite Sea and Tipo with an honourable mention to Cinderella. Again, if you've been playing Lorcana, it's pretty obvious. Without Sail, without Tipo, I don't think Sapphire would even be played like half as much as it is currently. It powers out Blurple by ramping from 2 ink to 4 ink, it powers out Sapphire Emerald, it powers out Sapphire Steel, and also of course with the recent set 11 Ember Sapphire as well. Ramping on 2 ink is extremely strong, and being inkable also makes them so much better than the other option for ramping, which is 1 jump ahead. Used to be played before Sail, before Tipo was printed in set 5 and Sail was printed in set 6, and after these two came out, not anymore. Go away, 1 jump ahead, worthless. Or at least until these two boys rotate out and we are forced to play 1 jump. Yeah, I don't really need to say anything further. Ramping is good because you get to play bigger stuff earlier than your opponent. These guys have been around forever and my copies of them are well worn. I've played them for a long time. At this point, it'll be a sad day when they leave. I put Cinderella as an honourable mention because not every single deck that plays Sail and Tipo plays Cinderella, but a good portion of them do. Basically, only Blurple doesn't. Alright, third pillar of Core Constructed, Doc. So this fella's been around for quite a while as well and has been absolutely carrying low to the ground decks for the entirety of his existence in Lorcana. It's just really such a strong effect for 2 ink, which is so cheap. The conceit of the effect being that you have to discard your hand, but if you don't have a hand, then you just draw 2, and decks that are good at not having a hand are decks that get to play a lot of their cards quickly, which are decks that are cheap in ink costs. However, the effect on Doc is so efficient that it's even being played currently in Sapphire Steel, a deck with 6 and 7 drops. So not just limited to small low to the ground decks, even expensive decks as well, which is a bit of a non-bow, but that just shows you how strong Doc is, that it deserves to be played even in a deck that's not suited for it. In Lorcana, card velocity is king, and Doc absolutely is one of the best ways in Core Constructed to see and play a lot of cards in as few turns as possible. Number 4 on my list of pillars of Core Constructed, Grandmother Willow. This is a newer addition to the pantheon of god tier playables in Core, but I think this kindly old tree is here to stay. As mentioned earlier, ramp is awesome, and she provides just that, in an ink color that doesn't really typically get ramp on as good of a rate as Grandmother Willow provides. Of course, we've seen something like Pluto before, but because it needs to turn sideways in order to use its effect, and it can get banished for basically free, nowhere close to as good as Grandmother Willow. Further, by being a character, she is good with cards that are good with characters, so Tramp, Lady, Stitch, Strength of a Raging Fire, and in some ways is better than just being an additional piece of ink. Also, because Amber is typically an aggressive color, her ability to play a 1-drop for free on turn 2 on the turn that she's played is particularly optimized for Amber, so overall a great card, a true pillar of the format, is currently a key reason why 2 of the best decks in Core Constructed currently are Dogs, which is Amber Emerald, and Amber Steel, Steel Song aggro type deal that's been making waves recently. And last and least, this list is kind of like ranked in my opinion the order of strength of the pillar of the format, Hades Infernal Schemer. So for this last pillar, I think it might be a bit controversial because it's not really an engine card per se, and it's also not an auto include in every single Sapphire deck. For example, Sapphire Emerald lists of recent times famously don't play Hades, but I think I would be remiss not to include it. It's the cleanest board-based 2-for-1 that's available in Core Constructed, and it's a key reason for Blurple's long-term success all the way since Fable, and a big reason why Sapphire Steel continues to even be remotely playable. Of course, there are plenty of cards I haven't even mentioned, Lady and Tramp of course, but those in my opinion are 1-deck cards, and if I were to include 1-deck cards, then that would completely water down and make quite pointless this exercise. Strength of a Raging Fire, Hades Looking for a Deal, Dumbo, Angel, plenty of stuff I haven't talked about. I think all of these cards are subjectively, in my opinion, less critical to the format than the cards that I've mentioned. You are free to disagree with me, And you know, if you want to make a case for anything else, please feel free to do so in the comments. Engagement! So we have the pillars of Core Constructed. So now let's look at step 2 of this exercise. How do these pillars in Core Constructed currently stack up against the pillars of Infinity? But in order to decide that, we first need to identify what the pillars of Infinity are. Again, the following list are completely my personal views from playing a reasonably fair amount of Infinity over the past few weeks, so don't at me if I excluded your favorite card or missed out on one trendy card that's going on in Twitter with like 5 people looking at it, or like some deck with like 400 views on Dreamborn. Sorry, I'm not all the way up to speed, but I think I'm up to speed enough to make this list. Alright, pillar number 1 of Infinity is a package of cards: Cinderella 1, Angel 2, and Akut et Imuti. So I'm gonna come in strong with this hot take. I think that currently the most busted thing that you can do in Infinity is to have a turn 1 singer, so Cinderella or Angel, who can sing a turn 2 Akut et Imuti, so that you can play a 3-drop or a 4-drop on turn 2 way ahead of schedule. This interaction is currently what is powering Steel Song in Infinity, who is starting to play Aerial 4, the Core Constructed Aerial 4, to take advantage of this, like we have been seeing in Core Constructed. And this interaction also powers Lemon Lime to cheat out a fast Muses or a fast Aerial Spectacular Singer or a fast Prince John. The fact that Cinderella 1 even has a friend in Angel to improve the consistency of drawing a turn 1 singer is just awesome, it's crazy. To me, this pillar feels so strong that I've started even playing Amber Amethyst with these core cards just to play, you know, like Amethyst 4-drops on turn 2, like Genies and like Elsa's on turn 3, and like turn 4 Demonas and stuff. It's that strong, it's worth even trying to go down this path, in my opinion. So, number 1 strongest pillar in Infinity: Cinderella, Angel, and Akut. Number 2 pillar of Infinity: Aerial Spectacular Singer. So now it's no surprise to anyone with eyes that this card made the list. I mean, look at the text on this baby. She replaces herself with finding a song. She can sing big songs as well. She's one of the key pieces in Steel Song because she can sing And Then Along Came Zeus herself. She can sing A Whole New World herself. She can sing all of the songs in Steel Song herself. And she's also a core part into what is making Lemon Lime extremely good as well now, because having her on board goes a long way to singing Under the Sea. She's just a ridiculously above rate 3-drop card, nothing more to be said. I do think that she falls slightly behind Cinderella 1, Angel 2 and Akut, my number 1 on the list, because those cards as a package in total do more for more decks than Aerial, because Aerial really needs the density of songs, whereas those boys don't really need as many songs as Aerial does to be good. We're kind of splitting hairs here. They're part of the same singer package that is rocking Infinity right now. In my opinion, Aerial just falls slightly behind those as being a critical pillar of the format, but just by a little bit. Alright, pillar number 3 of Infinity, it's another set of cards. It's 3 cards from Emerald: Diablo, Prince John, and Muses. So these 3 are essentially the core components to almost every Emerald deck in Infinity bar Sapphire Emerald. Diablo is an early singer and also gives you draw velocity. Prince John is an actual draw engine when paired with discard songs and actions. And Muses acts as board control, because when you play a 4-set songs that discard stuff that Diablo can sing as well, you get to return smaller characters back to your opponent's hand, thereby controlling the size of the board. All 3 of these characters, even though they do different things, they all synergize well together because they all work well with songs. They are all difficult to interact with in their own way. Diablo has evasive and comes down very early. Prince John and Muses both have ward, so if they don't turn sideways, you can't touch them very easily. And these are basically the core to 2.5 decks in Infinity. Lemon Lime, which has a heavy discard focus. Emerald Steel, which touches on discard but has some more songs that do board control stuff, as well as Diablo discard decks in Emerald Amethyst that focus more on discard as well as some bounce, plays more of a disruptive game that tends to prey on other Diablo Prince John decks rather than be good against the field as a whole. This package has been around again for a long time, will continue to be around for a long time, until maybe it sees a ban to Prince John or Diablo, which is what some people are calling for. Personally, I don't think that's very necessary. I think that Diablo feels very strong on the board, but actually objectively the impact on the game is so-so, assuming you build your deck well enough to be able to respond to it timely, because answers are indeed available. And for Prince John, it's a big tempo loss. It's always checked by aggro decks, so not necessary for ban, but still strong enough to be a pillar of the format. So, pillar number 4 of Infinity, Sail the Azure Sea and Tipo! But I'm excluding Cinderella this time. Guess what? What's busted in core that's been around since pre-rotation continues to be busted in Infinity. Ramping on 2 is the core to every Sapphire deck that's playable in Infinity as well. It remains to be seen currently in Infinity whether Cinderella will become the same staple 4-drop of choice that it is in core over something like Grandma Thala. My inclination currently is no, because Grandma Thala is inkable and its draw effect gets around a Diablo, assuming you don't have removal for Diablo earlier. But Sail the Azure Sea and Tipo will continue to be 4-offs in every competitive Sapphire deck in Infinity until the end of time, until the end of Lorcana, or until something more ridiculous comes along. Alright, finally, pillar number 5 of Infinity, in my view, is Popsicle with Tamatoa 6. These 2 cards are the core to every single item strategy, which is Ruby Sapphire, Sapphire Steel, and also to some degree Emerald Sapphire. The interaction is pretty self-evident. Popsicle comes into play for very cheap. It draws you a card to filter deeper into your deck. You can banish it for free by itself without needing any other card, and sometimes for value as well when you remove 2 damage off of a character. And later on in the game, where you have 2, maybe even just 1 Popsicle in your discard, you can bring them back into your hand with a Tamatoa 6 and replay those Popsicles to draw more cards. Popsicle, of course, is more important to this whole item deck shenanigans than Tamatoa. I mean, Tamatoa is legal in Core Constructed, but sees almost no play because there is no Popsicle, nor is there a Fortis Sphere. I put this at the last because while the decks that they are in are strong, the interaction is clearly significantly way less busted than like Akut and Singers, right? Or like Diablo, but still good enough to make the list as the key draw engine that fuels the main control decks in the format. Alright, so that's it for my list. Of course, again, I have left off a whole bunch of other cards, like for example, A Whole New World, but I see that card more honestly as a payoff for being able to sing it efficiently rather than an engine unto itself. For what it's worth, it does look to me like Steel Song decks currently aren't even that reliant on A Whole New World anymore because they have Aerial 4 as a draw engine to go along with the docs that they've been playing. The only other like true engine card that I've left off is Merlin Rabbit, and to be honest, I think it's time to like sound the grave bells for Merlin Rabbit. I think Merlin Rabbit's time has unfortunately passed. It still has its place against discard heavy decks in the format or in other mega grindy matchups where there isn't really any race for lore, but in my experience, these matchups, these decks come somewhat few and far between as compared to normal Lorcana decks that may have a smattering of discard but are also able to put on lore and board pressure. There are just more ink efficient ways to draw cards currently in the game, so yep, I'm not including Merlin Rabbit in this list. Sorry! So we have our core pillars here. Woo! And we also have our Infinity pillars. Let's say here onwards. Something like that. So which of the core pillars do we think can make it into Infinity? Well, Sail and Tipo are already there, so because these predate Core Constructed after all, so yeah, obviously those make it in, but I think that's barely fair. What about Dock? Well, Dock might see play as a 2-off in like Ember Steel or Emerald Steel, but I don't really see it being the same powerhouse it is in Core Constructed than it is in Infinity. And the reason is because decks in Infinity tend to be more resource rich than decks in Core Constructed, which basically translates to when you feel like you want to play Dock, you actually have quite a few more cards in your hand because more of your cards draw you cards. You know, things like Let the Storm Rage On, things like Diablo, things like Aerial 3, Aerial 4. Basically, people just tend to have more cards in hand, so the effect on Dock tends to be a bit more of a drawback than in Core Constructed, where you can much more easily deplete your hand. What about Grandmother Willow? Well, it sees play in the Infinity version of Dogs, Shona Dogs, or maybe dogs sans the Shunabog or sans dogs at all. Just a normal Amber Emerald aggro deck. But this card will never pop off in the same way in Infinity than it does in Core Constructed for one main reason, and one main reason alone. Let the storm rage on. It's just too clean and efficient an answer for Grandmother Willow to truly be fantastic and see play in a wide variety of decks. I personally have been playing Grandmother Willow in Amber Amethyst, and while it is good, its presence as a 4-off in my deck is kind of the reason why the Steel Song matchup is pretty bad. So I'm looking to cut it, to be honest. What about Hades Inferno Schemer? I mean, let's be frank, its inclusion in my Core Constructed pillar list is already a bit of a charity inclusion. This card will not see widespread play in Infinity, and it didn't even see widespread play pre-rotation in set 1 to 8 Constructed, so it's not going to last in Infinity. Maybe as a 1-off, 2-off, not more than that. So at this point, I think you can tell based on what in the list that I've skipped that I think has a chance to actually make it big in Infinity, and that one card is, drumroll please, Demona. Yes, I think Demona is good enough to see play in Infinity and revive what is probably the worst in color in Infinity, Amethyst, which is very strange for people who only play Core Constructed, I know, but that's one reason to get into Infinity, because Amethyst is not good. And out of the millions of things that Demona does when it comes into play, the one key reason why I think it has a place in Infinity is because it beats Ward. It can exert Ward characters. A big part of Infinity right now is the aforementioned Emerald Core, namely Prince John and Muses, and the cleanest way to beat these cards is obviously Sisu 8, or you could play an Under the Sea, and that's the reason why both of these cards see a good amount of play in their respective ink colors. But Demona offers another avenue to beat your Prince John and your Muses, so long as you can maintain a board presence, which is kind of the core identity of Amethyst. It's also great as a tempo positive refill of your hand against control decks, and puts on great lore pressure as well because it can quest for 2. So of the current crop of standout pillar cards in Core Constructed, if anything is going to lift the tide of fair Amethyst decks in Infinity and make a big splash, is going to be Demona. So to conclude, this was a very fun exercise. I think it really reveals just how strong something has to be to make any impact in Infinity, because it is, after all, a very strong format with a lot of very busted stuff. The power level is just crazy high. And for my next video, I'm likely going to be looking at the cards from Wilds Unknown to point out the things that I think are going to be good, with in particular an emphasis on Infinity, because that's what I'm going to be playing a lot of in the coming weeks and months. So please look out for the video. And even if I don't end up making it for another 2.5 months because, because I'm busy, thanks so much for watching this one all the way to the end. For new viewers, please be sure to like and subscribe. And that's it for this one. See ya, thanks, bye!